Have you ever met someone who seems distant, cold, or overly guarded, and you couldn't quite figure out why? What if I told you that behind that silence, behind that emotional armor, there might be a hidden wound, one that's never fully healed? This video is for anyone who's ever struggled to understand their behavior or the confusing reactions of someone they love. If you've ever asked yourself, why do I push people away when I want connection? Or why do I feel drained by helping others, yet can't stop? You are not alone. These are not flaws. They are survival mechanisms built from pain. Psychologist Carl Jung believed that unprocessed pain doesn't disappear, it hides and transforms into behavior. In this video, we're going to decode those behaviors, reveal what they truly mean, and most importantly, learn how to heal them from the inside out. By the end, you'll understand why some people overthink everything, why others can't trust easily, and why those who seem the strongest are often carrying the heaviest emotional burdens. This isn't just psychology, it's a mirror, one that might show you pieces of yourself you've long ignored. Stay with me, because this could be the beginning of real healing. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please click the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay updated on all our latest content. Some people aren't cold at all. They're just carefully, painfully guarded. And others? They're not hard to love. They've simply learned, often through heartbreak or betrayal, to doubt love's promises. What we so easily label as distant, complicated, or unavailable behavior is, in truth, the invisible language of someone who's had to survive emotional devastation. Their silence, their walls, their emotional detachment. It's not rudeness or arrogance. It's protection. It's the body and mind saying, I can't go through that again. I believe we live in a world too quick to judge what it doesn't understand. We shame people for not opening up, for not trusting, for flinching at affection, but we rarely stop to ask why. The truth is, when pain doesn't find a place to be felt, to be spoken, to be cradled with compassion, it doesn't disappear. It sinks deep into the subconscious, where it quietly builds armor. And over time, that armor can harden so convincingly that even the person wearing it starts to believe it's who they truly are. Carl Jung once said that pain is the currency with which the soul pays for more consciousness. That sentence has stayed with me. He never glamorized suffering, but he knew it was sacred because it cracks us open. It demands we meet parts of ourselves we would rather avoid. When we dare to listen to deep pain, not rush past it or numb it, but listen, it tells us exactly where the wounds are. And often, it tells us where we stopped truly living. The behaviors we see in people who've been wounded, those intense reactions, that emotional distance, the sudden withdrawal, those aren't random. They're not personality quirks. They are survival blueprints, carefully built in the dark, often without the person even realizing it. I've come to believe that the more deeply someone has suffered, the more elaborate their internal architecture becomes. Complex psychological patterns, brilliant in their structure, but exhausting to live inside of. And yet, how often do we respond to these behaviors with judgment? We call someone too much, too closed off, or too emotional. That's like walking past a scar and scoffing at it, while ignoring the depth of the wound it once covered. But there is another way to see one that doesn't ask, what's wrong with you? But instead gently wonders, what happened to you? That shift in perspective, that is where real healing begins. When we stop interpreting someone's defenses as defects and start seeing them as survival stories, written in a language the soul needed to speak at the time. The psyche doesn't speak in clear sentences. It speaks through symbols, through repetition, through emotional patterns. And what may look like an overreaction to us may be an ancient echo of pain, pleading to be seen. I've learned that the wounded soul doesn't want pity, it wants a presence. It longs to be seen, truly seen, not fixed, not analyzed, but witnessed. And when that happens, when someone is met with understanding rather than suspicion, the ego begins to soften. It stops reacting on autopilot and starts listening. And this is the most beautiful part. When we begin to understand that pain shapes us, but doesn't define us, we can slowly, ever so gently, start peeling away the armor, little by little, thread by thread. And underneath that protection, there is still a tender, breathing heart. Still, a soul that wants to love and be loved, even if it's terrified. Some pain doesn't just disappear, it reorganizes itself within us. If we don't welcome it, if we ignore it, it becomes a living core that continues to react to life as if the original wound never stopped. Jung called these reactions complexes, unconscious emotional structures with a life of their own. They're not evil, they're not dysfunctions. They're the soul's emergency systems. They were built because the ego could not bear the original impact alone. Imagine a child who was deeply rejected, not necessarily by words, but by silence, an absence of affection, a parent's glance that carried disappointment more than love. That kind of pain doesn't just fade, it implants itself. It becomes a rejection complex. And that child, even as an adult, may find themselves spiraling emotionally when someone doesn't text back when a tone feels cold, when they sense distance, even if it's not there. That's not overreacting. That's the past screaming through the present. That's the original wound reopening with the same intensity as the day it first tore through the heart. And in my opinion, when we realize this, when we stop seeing these people or ourselves as too sensitive, too dramatic, or too broken, we create space for something extraordinary. We create space for truth. And with truth comes the possibility of healing. Jung once said, "We all have complexes. The problem is when they have us, and how true that is. Because when a complex is triggered, it doesn't gently raise its hand, it hijacks the entire emotional system. Suddenly, the person isn't reacting to what's in front of them. They're reacting to something invisible, ancient, and unresolved. They might cry and not understand why. They might lash out over something small, shut down without warning, or feel an overwhelming emptiness that defies logic. But here's what we rarely acknowledge. These behaviors are not irrational. They are perfectly rational responses inside a system built to survive pain. And when someone has lived through enough of it, their inner world starts to develop sophisticated alarms that ring the moment something in the present even resembles a past wound. That's what these complexes are. Not flaws, not weaknesses, but emotional fire alarms. They go off to protect, to alert, to prevent history from repeating itself even when no real threat is present. I've met people, and maybe you have too, or maybe you are one who've spent years thinking they were too much, too emotional, too sensitive, too reactive. But the truth? You're not too much. You're hurting. And that hurt has learned to speak through your behavior. And that's why healing doesn't start with trying to fix yourself. It starts with listening, a kind of sacred inner listening. You pause and ask yourself gently, what part of me is asking to be held right now? Where is this coming from? What is this reaction trying to protect? Awareness doesn't make the pain vanish overnight, but it removes its silent grip. Complexes aren't enemies. They are emotional memories, frozen in time, waiting for us to stop judging and start listening. And when we do, they stop screaming. They begin to whisper. And in that whisper, something miraculous happens. The soul begins to reorganize. Not to forget what happened, not to erase it, but to create space where pain no longer dominates, and healing can begin. Now, let's talk about something people often misunderstand: distrust. Distrust isn't coldness. It's not bitterness. It's survival. When someone has been deeply hurt, especially in a place they once believed was safe, trusting again is no small act. It's not a moment of courage, it's a daily battle. For that person, trust isn't a default. It's a high-stakes risk, a leap without a safety net. Even in calm, loving environments, the soul remains on alert. The unconscious doesn't distinguish between what is and what was. It only sees emotional patterns. So when it senses the faintest echo of betrayal or neglect, it rings the alarm again. This constant state of vigilance is exhausting, but it was once necessary. It came from betrayal, from abandonment, from silence where there should have been presence. It doesn't matter if the hurt came from a parent, a partner, or a friend. What matters is that it left a mark so deep the person had to build emotional armor to survive. So the ego does what it knows. It builds defenses. It studies people's faces. It interprets every silence. It prepares for heartbreak before love even has a chance. And when no threat can be found, it imagines one just in case. People who live this way don't want to be guarded, but they also don't want to relive the pain. Distrust becomes a filter. Every word, every smile, every touch passes through it, measured, weighed, tested, doubted. Because sometimes, believing feels far more dangerous than walking away. Jung understood this deeply. He didn't see the psyche as broken, but as wise. The ego doesn't distrust out of malice. It learned to distrust to survive. But here's the heartbreaking part. Over time, that protection becomes its kind of prison. Because while it may guard against hurt, it also blocks love. A real connection can't exist where trust is always on trial. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons helpful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. So, how do we begin to heal this? It starts when we realize that our reaction isn't to now, it's to before. The fear that's pulsing inside isn't about the person in front of you. It's an echo, an old ghost of something unresolved. And it takes tremendous bravery to pause that inner alarm and whisper to yourself, wait, is this real? Or is this my memory dragging me back? Trusting again doesn't mean dropping every defense. It doesn't mean throwing open the gates of your heart and letting everyone in. It means allowing emotional reality checks. It means saying, maybe this moment is different, and giving the present a chance to prove it. Distrust is not a mistake. It's a response. But when the ego realizes it's no longer under attack, it can begin slowly, gently to rest. There are moments in life when everything feels like it's crumbling, when the soul retreats, trust is shattered, people feel like threats, and pain becomes your only reliable companion. In those moments, isolation doesn't feel like a decision, it feels like instinct. The soul pulls away like a wounded animal recoiling from touch, not out of pride, not to punish, but because emotional exposure feels too dangerous. So it hides, it builds invisible walls. It goes quiet not to harm others, but to survive another day. And if you've ever found yourself doing that, please know, I see you. You're not broken. You're protecting something that once felt too fragile to expose. But that part of you, it deserves to be seen, not rushed, not pushed, but slowly, patiently, seen. And when that happens, true healing doesn't feel like an explosion. It feels like a breath, a soft opening, a moment when the soul finally realizes maybe it's safe to come out. This kind of emotional withdrawal is so often misunderstood from the outside. People see someone go quiet, step back, disappear, and they interpret it as coldness, indifference, or even arrogance. But what they don't see, what they don't feel, is what's happening on the inside, because inside, it's not distance, it's desperation. Not rejection, it's protection. In truth, isolation, especially after emotional pain, isn't just avoidance. It's a kind of psychic womb, a sacred space the soul retreats to when the world has torn it open too deeply. It's in that quiet, dark, inner cave that the self begins trying to reorganize, to remember who it is, now that nothing outside feels safe anymore. Jung saw this inward turning not as weakness, but as a symbolic journey, death, and rebirth. The shadow doesn't fold into itself, because it has given up. It folds in because it knows it cannot survive exposure while it's still bleeding. It needs the dark to breathe again. And sometimes, silence is the only language left for someone who's still learning how to name their pain. But the tragedy is, what begins as refuge can slowly morph into a cage. What once offered safety becomes suffocating. What was meant to be temporary, a pause, a breath, a moment to regroup, becomes a permanent state. Chronic isolation, emotional exile. The soul adapts. It gets used to relying on no one. It learns not to expect, not to ask, not to hope. And eventually, even the heart still beating faithfully lives behind locked doors no one has the key to anymore. Not because it wants to be alone, but because it's forgotten how to be held. The turning point, I believe, is awareness. Not a dramatic awakening, not some loud epiphany. Just a quiet truth that slips in through the cracks. I pulled away because I needed to survive. But maybe, just maybe, I don't have to stay alone anymore. That kind of honesty is a miracle. It softens the sharp edges of our defenses. It doesn't force the door open, but it nudges it just a little. And slowly, that unbearable isolation begins to shift into something gentler. Solitude, a space where being alone doesn't mean being disconnected. This is where healing begins, not by trying to be who we were before the pain, but by daring to be real, even if it's fragile. And in that slow return to self, reconnection becomes possible. Reconnection with our feelings, with others, and most beautifully with life itself. Not in the same way as before, but in a way that's more raw, more honest, and more meaningful. People who have withdrawn deeply, who have lived inside that emotional cave, know something most others don't. They know exactly when it's finally safe to come out. Not all at once, but one step at a time. And that, to me, is true strength. And then some seem unshakable. The ones who speak with certainty, who move through life with steady steps and confident eyes. They look invincible on the surface. But behind that composed exterior is often a soul that has learned the hard way that vulnerability isn't welcome. It's not that they're unaffected, it's that they were trained to hide it. Somewhere along the line, often in childhood, they learned that crying leads to silence, that being soft invites shame, and that expressing need only brings rejection. So they built something to survive. Psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott called it the false self, a mask a child learns to wear when their emotional world is too unpredictable or unsafe. It's not chosen, it's constructed out of necessity. When your real self is never met with love, you stop showing it. You hide it to protect it. You replace it with something more acceptable, more controlled, more together. Later in life, that mask becomes what Jung called the persona, the image we present to the world. We all have one, and to a degree, we all need one. But for people who have suffered deeply, the persona can become a golden cage. Beautiful from the outside, imprisoning from within. What was meant to be protection becomes identity. And the terrifying question begins to echo, who am I if I'm not performing anymore? The persona isn't the enemy. It helps us survive social life, work, and expectations. But the danger lies in over-identifying with it, when the mask becomes our skin, and we forget how to take it off. And so, many people move through life performing strength. They act like nothing gets to them. They offer polished smiles and poised responses. But the truth is, underneath it all, they're exhausted. That strength is a shield. A sophisticated one, elegant, intelligent, efficient, but also unbearably lonely. Because the more polished the performance, the harder it is to access the soul behind it. That's why people who are wounded don't always appear as broken or hurting. They can often come across as cold, distant, or even arrogant. But if you look beneath the surface look, you'll often find a soul that's not unfeeling, but guarded, painfully guarded. These aren't people who don't feel. They're people who feel too much. So much so that the ego had to step in and build walls fast and high. It learned early on that showing emotions was dangerous, that vulnerability could be used against them, and that being too visible meant being exposed sometimes to cruelty, rejection, or abandonment. So it crafted defenses, rehearsed answers, polite smiles, emotional numbness. It locked the pain away in a quiet corner of the psyche where no one else could reach it. Not even them. But no persona, no matter how polished or poised, is truly indestructible. Over time, it begins to crack, especially when the soul inside grows tired of pretending, when the loneliness becomes louder than the voice you use in the world, when your silence starts to echo back at you like a question you can't avoid anymore. Who am I, really beyond the mask? That question is the spark. That's where healing begins. Not by tearing down the persona completely, but by loosening your grip on it, by allowing it to soften. Real strength is not the ability to seem untouched by life. It's the courage to be seen in the places where you still feel broken. It's the grace of letting someone witness your tenderness, even when your hands are still shaking. Not all empathy is born from enlightenment. Some of the deepest, rawest empathy we carry is born from our unresolved wounds. People who have suffered immensely often develop a sensitivity to the emotional undertones of others. They can feel energy in a room. They sense sadness in someone's eyes before a word is spoken. They pick up on every shift in tone, every micro-expression. And it's beautiful, but it's also heavy. At first, this seems like a gift, a virtue, and in many ways, it is. But when that empathy crosses the boundary of one's limits and becomes a substitute for healing the self, it stops being a strength. It becomes a projection. It becomes an escape. So often what we think is compassion for someone else is us recognizing something unfinished in ourselves. We don't consciously realize it. But when someone else cries, it's like our soul remembers what we still haven't cried for. And instead of turning inward to tend to our hurt, we pour everything into helping them. We become the fixer, the comforter, the emotional anchor. We become the one who understands, the one who listens, the one who gives, and over time that role becomes our identity. But here's the truth. Sometimes, behind all that giving is a quiet avoidance, a way to keep from facing the painful descent into our own story, because caring for others can feel safer than facing our darkness. Carl Jung described this dynamic through the lens of projection. When we can't hold something within, we cast it outward. In the case of empathy, we're projecting our own suppressed grief, shame, or fear onto the people we try to help. And while that projection can create connection, it also drains us deeply. Why? Because no relationship can thrive when it's built on imbalance. When one gives everything and the other just receives. That's not love. That's emotional codependency wearing the mask of kindness. And eventually, that kind of love starts to feel like quiet self-abandonment. The exhaustion that comes from this is bone deep. You give and give, but never feel filled. You're worn out, emotionally raw, and constantly questioning why you feel so empty despite doing so much. That's the cost of unrestrained empathy. It leaves you depleted, invisible, and sometimes even resentful, though you'll rarely admit it. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons helpful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Healing begins with a shift one, so gentle it's easy to miss, but powerful enough to change everything. It begins when you finally say, I matter too, when you stop confusing love with sacrifice, when you realize that listening to someone else's pain means nothing if you're silencing your own. Helping someone doesn't mean carrying them. It means walking beside them with your own emotional feet firmly planted. It means holding space for another without erasing yourself to do it. True empathy is quiet. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't need to be rescued. It simply shows up. But for it to be sustainable, it must be rooted in self-awareness. in self-compassion, in the willingness to tend to your pain before reaching to heal someone else's. Only when the wound inside has been acknowledged, not necessarily healed, but honored, can empathy become present. Not projection, not performance, but a real living presence, the kind that doesn't burn you out, the kind that restores both the giver and the receiver, because those who have truly learned to care for themselves can show up for others without disappearing in the process. And that, to me, is the kind of empathy that truly heals not just the other person, but you too. It's quiet, humble, and deeply, beautifully human. To love, for someone who's been hurt, is never just a simple gesture. It may look like hesitation or even detachment, but underneath is a storm of memory, a flooding of past pain, disappointment, and longing that once went unanswered. It's not that they don't want to love. It's not that they don't feel. On the contrary, there's often a deep desire to connect. But that desire is tangled with 1,000 echoes of what went wrong before. Every time they try to open their heart, it's as if they're stepping into a minefield, never knowing what might trigger the old wounds. Even if the new person in front of them is kind, safe, and nothing like the ones who caused the damage, the body still remembers. The soul still flinches. Something inside remains tightly on guard, waiting. So affection does come, but it wears armor. A smile that's half-held, a hesitant touch, a presence that's real but reserved. The connection begins to form, but it's constantly surveyed by the mind, questioned, examined, protected. This is love wrapped in caution, bonded through a filter of vigilance. To the outside world, this emotional restraint might look like coldness or disinterest. But let me tell you, it's not a lack of feeling. It's a surplus of it. It's the heart, desperately wanting to love again, but still bleeding from the last time it tried. The fear isn't always of the person standing in front of them. It's of what that person might awaken. The ache of abandonment, the betrayal of trust, the heartbreak that came when someone promised to stay and didn't. So the heart edges forward with trembling steps, and the ego, like a tired, battle-worn soldier, refuses to lower its shield, because vulnerability has cost too much in the past. Carl Jung understood this. He knew that relationships are not just connections, they're mirrors. They're the stages where all our unresolved pain reappears, where our unconscious wounds perform their most dramatic roles. And that's why people who have suffered deeply often love with hesitation. They may look present, but there's always a part of them holding back, one foot outside the door. A silent escape plan is always on standby. At first glance, this seems like a smart kind of self-preservation, but over time, it begins to corrode the connection. Because no matter how strong the bond is, intimacy requires vulnerability. And true vulnerability demands that we be able to tell the difference between the pain that once was and the reality that is now. The truth is, the person standing before us today isn't the one who caused our scars. But old wounds don't know the difference. They see through the same cracked lens, replaying the same story. Jung once said, "True love begins where projection ends." And he was right. As long as we're still projecting our fears, our past heartbreaks, and our unhealed traumas onto someone else, we aren't truly seeing them. We're seeing a ghost, a shadow, an echo, and instead of love setting us free, it starts to trap us. It becomes heavy, full of suspicion, withdrawal, and pressure. A battleground between who hurt us back then and who's trying to love us now. Healing in this tender, complicated space doesn't happen quickly. It takes presence, the kind of presence that listens more than it speaks. It takes honesty, the kind that doesn't flinch when the truth is hard to admit. And above all, it takes a deep self-reflection. You have to be willing to ask yourself, not once, but again and again, am I reacting to what's happening right now, or to something from long ago? Because the answer to that question may be the key that unlocks a new kind of love. One that isn't untangled in fear, one that isn't filtered through pain. A love that sees, stands openly, and finally lets both people be free. Trust isn't about diving in headfirst. It's not about throwing away every shield or ignoring every warning bell. For someone who has known deep hurt, trust is not a door that flies open. It's a window that cracks slowly, cautiously, over time. It's about beginning to sense, with trembling hope, that maybe, just maybe, there are safe places. That not all love is followed by pain. That you can let someone close without disappearing. That it's possible to trust and remain whole. And when that realization takes root, something incredible happens. The armor, the emotional walls, the constant alertness, the endless overthinking no longer has to be torn down. It simply starts to dissolve. Not because someone forced it to, but because it finally isn't needed anymore. Some people carry the weight of the world in complete silence. You know, the ones who never ask for help, who never break down in front of others, the ones who are always fine. To the outside world, they seem strong, dependable, and shakeable. People admire their resilience. But what few see is that this strength wasn't chosen. It was forced. Born not from confidence, but from the absence of someone to lean on. When no one came, when no one noticed, when no one asked, the soul had to stand up on its legs or collapse. And it did. It stood. It walked forward, alone. The kind of strength forged in this kind of pain isn't flashy. It doesn't make grand declarations or demand recognition. No, this strength is quiet. It's the strength of someone who has cried alone and wiped their tears. Of someone who's fallen again and again, but got back up without applause. It's a strength carved from exhaustion, from the terror of breaking, and the necessity of holding everything together anyway. Jung understood something few do, that when a person is shattered by life, a hidden process begins inside. A spontaneous, almost sacred search for the self. Not the image, not the ego, the true self. Because when everything around you falls apart, when you can no longer rely on the external world to hold you, something inside refuses to give up. Something ancient, something eternal. It whispers, keep going, even when there's no sign of a path ahead, even when you feel like you're wandering in darkness. That whisper, that's the self, the deepest part of your soul calling you home. But here's the paradox. When strength goes unmatched by affection, by care, by softness, it begins to harden. What once helped you survive starts turning to stone. The soul becomes so used to enduring that it forgets how to receive, how to let in comfort, how to let someone hold you when you're tired of being strong. Eventually, that kind of strength becomes armor, not just against others, but against yourself. And showing pain, letting it surface after all that effort to hold it in, that can feel like a betrayal of the very path you survived to get here. But the truth is, real strength doesn't live in isolation. It lives beside vulnerability, side by side. True strength is not about never needing anyone. It's about knowing when it's finally safe to rest. It's about being able to whisper, I can't do this alone anymore, and trusting that it doesn't make you weak, it makes you whole. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons helpful, please comment on number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Strength can be fierce, but it can also be gentle. And when the soul understands deeply and quietly that it no longer has to fight just to exist, a new kind of strength rises. Not survival strength, born out of fear, but conscious strength, a grounded knowing that says, I have lived, I have hurt, I have scars, but I am still here, and I do not need to prove it anymore. You begin to carry your story without hardening around it. You honor the pain without needing to wear it like armor. The scars remain, but they're no longer evidence. They're reminders. And the path? It stops being lonely, maybe still quiet, but not empty. Not abandoned. then some live in their heads far more than their bodies. They are thinkers, analyzers, chronic over-processors. They replay old conversations. They dissect every glance, every word, every silence. They project possibilities and brace for things that haven't even happened. To others, it might look like sharp intelligence, and in some ways, it is. But more often than not, it's fear in disguise. Overthinking is one of the cleverest masks pain can wear, because for someone who has experienced emotional trauma, feeling can become terrifying. The emotional world becomes unpredictable, unstable, and too intense to trust. So the psyche, in an act of self-protection, transfers everything into the realm of logic. The mind becomes the safe house, a place where things can be analyzed, categorized, explained. But in that pursuit of control, something essential is lost: emotional spontaneity, joy, presence, aliveness. Jung reminded us that knowing is not enough, we must live. And living means feeling, even when it hurts. So the ego, ever the protector, does what it believes it finds a solution. It shifts everything into the realm of logic. Emotion is messy, unpredictable, unsafe. But thought? Thought can be controlled, calculated, contained. The mind becomes a fortress, a sterile, organized space where everything has a label, a reason, a cause. It becomes the place where pain is picked apart rather than felt, a place where vulnerability is replaced with strategy. And at first, this feels like strength, like clarity. But in truth, it's just another kind of hiding. Because in the pursuit of control, something irreplaceable is lost: emotional spontaneity. The rawness that makes us feel alive, the joy that bubbles up unannounced, the grief that asks to be held, not analyzed. Jung warned us. He said, "Knowing is not enough, we must live." And living means more than understanding, it means feeling. Even when it burns, even when it's terrifying. Excessive reflection, this habit of dissecting every experience, becomes the ego's clever way of suspending pain. We don't feel it, we study it. We don't cry, we categorize. But here's the truth: what isn't felt can't be healed. And what isn't integrated continues to run the show from the shadows. I've seen this firsthand: people who can explain exactly why they feel the way they do, who understand every childhood wound, every toxic pattern, every psychological defense, and yet they remain stuck, because analysis alone is a loop, a beautiful, intellectual trap. You can understand everything and still feel nothing. And that's the paradox. Thinking feels safe, the feeling doesn't. Our unconscious convinces us that we'll drown if we feel too much. That will break. But the real danger lies in never feeling at all, because only feeling brings transformation, not over-explanation, not detachment, not rehearsed insight. Real change happens when pain passes through the body, not just the mind. That's when it finds its resting place. That's when it loosens its grip. But the feeling doesn't mean falling apart. It doesn't mean losing yourself in suffering. It means letting your body speak. It means allowing tears to come without shame. It means sitting in silence without trying to fill it with answers. It means not hiding behind the clever arguments you've built to avoid the truth of what your heart is carrying. And no, that doesn't make you weak. It makes you real. It makes you human. When thought finally stops being a defense mechanism and starts being the tool it was meant to be, something beautiful happens. It returns to its rightful place, not as armor, but as a guide. And in that space, your soul begins to realize that feeling isn't a threat. It's a sign of life. There is a kind of sensitivity that books can't teach, that no lecture or certification can instill. It's the kind that comes from having been shattered and still choosing to care, from having been in the dark and still reaching for someone else's hand. Many who have suffered deeply possess this gift, a warm, intuitive presence They can sit with someone's silence. They can hear what hasn't been said. They know exactly where it hurts, because they've bled there too. These are the souls Jung referred to as the wounded healers, a reflection of the mythological centaur, Chiron, a being who, though wounded himself, carried the wisdom to heal others. The pain didn't disqualify him, it became the very source of his gift. But here's where it gets complex. This ability to soothe, to hold space, to pour compassion into others, it doesn't always come from a place of wholeness. Sometimes it's born from an unconscious hope that if I can heal them, maybe I can finally stop hurting too. And that's a beautiful impulse, but also a dangerous one, because it can lead to self-forgetting. They become the helper, the therapist, the supporter, the strong one, always there for everyone else, while quietly avoiding the raw truth of their own ache, their own grief, their own unmet needs. The wounded healer walks a fine line between power and vulnerability, between sacred empathy and subtle avoidance. They offer presence to others, while often skipping the invitation to turn inward, to sit with their own absence. And that's why, beneath their strength, many of them feel deeply alone. Jung understood this trap intimately. He saw that the psyche is always trying to find balance. And when care for others becomes excessive, when it spills out in every direction, it's often a sign of what's being neglected inside. Because there's a difference between being generous and being self-abandoning. There's a difference between compassion and depletion, when helping others leaves you feeling drained, invisible, or quietly resentful. That's not healing. That's a cry for your care, disguised as a good deed. When the act of consoling others begins to leave you drained, quietly irritated, or feeling invisible, it's not because you've lost your compassion. It's because the wounded healer within you has tipped out of balance. That beautiful archetype, the one that helps you hold space for others, has started to neglect its most essential patient, you. Healing at this level doesn't mean walking away from the people you love or abandoning your empathy. It means including yourself in the circle of care. It means realizing that another person's pain can touch you, yes, but it should never consume you. That listening to others must be matched by listening to your own heart, that you can hold a presence for someone else without absorbing their entire emotional burden. You're allowed to be kind without sacrificing yourself in the process. This shift from unconscious self-abandonment to conscious self-inclusion is where transformation begins. When the wound is no longer a place you hide from, but a source of wisdom you live with, you stop caring as a way to escape and start caring from a place of grounded choice. Not because you need to save anyone, but because you've learned how to walk beside your pain, and in doing so, have earned the right to truly honor someone else's. This is the sacred difference. Care rooted in self-awareness isn't draining, it's steady, real, and liberating. But the healing doesn't stop there, because beneath all of this, another truth often begins to surface, something quieter, more tender, and harder to admit: the gradual erosion of hope. You see, expecting less can look like maturity. It can sound like wisdom, but sometimes it's just fear of wearing a thoughtful disguise. When someone has been hurt again and again, betrayed, dismissed, forgotten, hope starts to feel dangerous. Expectations start to feel like a setup for disappointment. And so, in order to protect itself, the soul starts to close in. It stops expecting. It stops wanting. It shrinks its desires into what feels realistic. It prepares for the worst so that nothing can catch it off guard. But behind this strategy, this calculated, well-rehearsed emotional detachment, is a deep, unspoken grief. The grief of someone who once waited with open hands for something that never came, and the heartbreak of what that waiting cost them. This way of living feels safe, but it's not freedom, because in shielding ourselves from disappointment, we also shield ourselves from joy, from possibility, from love. Relationships become shallow, dreams feel out of reach, and life becomes a controlled environment where nothing hurts too much, but nothing excites too deeply either. The soul wasn't made to live this way. Jung once said that the soul seeks expansion, that it wants to grow, to create, to connect, to experience life in its fullness. But when it has been bruised too many times, it doesn't stop wanting, it just starts doubting whether it can survive another fall. And that's the heartbreak of low expectations. They're not laziness. They're not indifferent. They are defense. A way to protect the fragile parts of ourselves that can't bear to be let down again. A way to keep the soul from splintering any further. But here's the truth. When this defense becomes too rigid, life stops happening in full color. It dims. It flattens. Everything outside your control becomes a perceived threat. Hope becomes foolish. Vulnerability becomes reckless. And the world shrinks to only what feels safe. So what do? We begin by noticing the pattern. That is the first act of courage, naming the strategy we've used to survive. Recognizing when we've stopped hoping, not because we're wise, but because we're still hurting. And then slowly, gently, we practice a new kind of hope. Not blind hope, not naive hope, but brave hope. The kind that says, yes, I've been let down, but I still want to live fully. The kind that knows life comes with no guarantees and still chooses to open the heart a little more each day. Because real hope isn't about certainty. It's about trust. Trust that even if the dream doesn't unfold the way we wanted, even if we stumble, even if we ache again, we will survive it. And more than that, we will grow from it. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons helpful, please comment on number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Regaining hope isn't a weakness. It's the boldest, most beautiful form of strength. It's the soul's quiet declaration, despite everything, I still choose life. And beneath all the scars you've learned to carry, there's still a quiet part of you that wants. It wants to feel, to engage, to trust again, to dream, even if it's afraid. And that desire, no matter how small, no matter how fragile, is sacred, because it means the soul is still alive beneath the rubble. And it's through that tiny crack of openness that the light begins to return. Through that small willingness, the soul begins to expand again. And when the soul expands, life follows. But here's what we often forget. Not all pain ends when the moment ends. Some wounds don't close with time. Some experiences continue to echo through the corridors of our inner world years, even decades after the original event. It's not because we're stuck. It's not because we want to suffer. It's because something in that moment was never processed, never felt full, never given space to be held. In these cases, the past isn't behind us, it's inside us. It doesn't live in our memory. It lives in our body, our reactions, our fears. And walking around with it is like moving through life with invisible open wounds. No one else sees them, but you feel them every day. You carry their weight silently. Jung said, "What we resist persists." And nowhere is that more true than with unacknowledged grief. Not just the grief of death, but the grief of absence. The grief of almost. The grief of what should have been, but wasn't. The love that didn't last. The affection you needed, but never received. The words you waited for, that never came. The childhood you never got to live. The apology that never arrived. These invisible losses are so often dismissed, but they're just as real as the ones we can name. And they leave behind chains not made of iron, but of memory and unmet longing. They tie us to moments we never got to complete. They hold power over us, not because we want them to, but because we've never been taught how to release what was never properly held. The ego doesn't like to look back. It wants to keep moving forward. So it builds strategies: denial, distraction, minimization. It tells us to move on, to stay strong, to let it go. But the soul doesn't operate on speed. It doesn't respond to commands. The soul moves slowly, gently. It needs time. It needs truth. It needs space. And most of all, it needs permission. Because grief doesn't truly begin until there's room to feel, not just with logic, but with tenderness, without rushing it, without shaming it, without trying to fix it. Letting go of the past doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't matter. It means integration. It means turning toward the pain, saying, yes, this happened. It mattered. It hurt. And now I will give it a place not to haunt me, but to live quietly within me. It's not erasure. It's transformation. It's the sacred work of turning a wound into a scar, something that no longer bleeds but still tells a story of survival, a story of growth, a story of what you made from what tried to break you. But this process, it isn't easy. It demands honesty. It requires the ego to let go of the performance of, I'm fine. It invites the soul to face what's been buried beneath layers of denial, pride, and silence. And that is not a small thing. That's courage. Only when that grief is fully allowed, only when it's named, felt, and honored, can the past stop rewriting the present. Only then do the old patterns begin to loosen their grip. Only then does the pain stop echoing through your new experiences like a ghost that won't leave. Fighting the past keeps us trapped in its arms. But letting go, truly letting go, isn't forgetting. It's not giving up. It's a soft, sacred act of inner bravery. It's saying, I accept what was. I don't deny it. I don't hate it. But I don't need to live in that place anymore. And in that act, something begins to dissolve. Not because the pain disappears, but because it finally finds a home, a resting place, a space where it no longer screams for attention because it's finally been seen. And when grief is finished, when it has spoken and been witnessed and held, the present becomes real again. And the future? The future no longer feels like a reflection of your pain. It becomes a clean canvas, a space for creation, for joy, for connection. Not because you erased the past, but because you finally let it sit quietly in the passenger seat. Instead of letting it drive, behind every defense, there is a story. And behind every story, there is a soul doing everything it can to keep going. What we often label as difficult, distant, or complicated behavior is not a flaw. It's a response, a deeply human, deeply adaptive response that was shaped not in comfort but in chaos. These behaviors aren't choices made in peace. They are survival strategies forged in the middle of emotional storms. Quiet, unseen blueprints the psyche drew in the dark to withstand what felt unbearable. Carl Jung understood this in a way few ever will. He knew that pain doesn't come to destroy us. It comes to reorganize us, not as punishment, but as protection. Not to break us down, but to rewire our way of being so we can live through what once threatened to end us. So what looks like coldness might be containment, emotional restraint that formed because feeling everything would have been too overwhelming. What appears to be distrust could be a safeguard built by a heart that was once trusted and was torn apart. What sounds like pride, distance, or excessive rationality. Often, it's fear, not laziness, not aloofness. Just fear internalized too young and rehearsed for so long that it became a kind of inner architecture. That's why healing can never begin with judgment. Judgment only hardens what was already aching. Real healing starts with listening, with presence, with the willingness to sit beside what's broken and whisper, I see you. You did what you had to do. We are not meant to rip ourselves open. We are meant to unfold slowly, kindly, truthfully. This unfolding is what Jung called individuation, the sacred journey of becoming who we truly are. And here's the truth that most people miss. This journey doesn't happen despite pain. It happens through it. It's by facing what hurts the most that we begin to discover what needs to be transformed. It's by gently turning toward the shadows, the parts of us we've hidden, denied, or long forgotten, that we start to rebuild our inner world with more wholeness. When pain is brought into the light of awareness, it no longer holds us hostage. It stops being a heavy, unconscious weight, dragging us down. It becomes something else, entirely a point of connection to our deepest self. The wound doesn't disappear, but it shifts. It stops being the center of our identity and becomes just one part of our story, a sacred part, yes, but not the whole of who we are. And in that reorganization, something extraordinary is born: presence. A kind of authenticity and self-contact that no book, no philosophy, no external achievement can ever offer. It's the experience of being home in your being. Healing is not linear. It's not neat, and it's not fast. But it is possible. It begins the moment we're brave enough to look beyond the surface, both in ourselves and others. When we stop asking, what's wrong with them, and start wondering what happened to them. What did they survive? Because most people aren't trying to be difficult. They're just trying to exist with the only tools they've been given. And often, those tools were forged in fire. That's where real empathy is born. Not from perfection, but from recognition. From soul meeting soul and saying, I've been there too. And in that recognition comes freedom. The possibility of becoming more human, more whole, more free. Because once the pain is truly recognized, when it's seen, honored, and no longer shoved into the shadows, it stops defining us. It begins to reveal us. So now I ask you, after all this, what touched your heart the most? What part of today's message echoed something you've lived through? Or perhaps something you've only now begun to understand? Because healing doesn't begin with answers. It begins with awareness, with the courage to witness our own wounds and to see others through a gentler lens. Now, I invite you to take a breath and ask yourself, what is one thing you've learned from this video that you will carry into your own life from this day forward? Is it the importance of softening your judgment, the quiet power of listening to your own pain, the courage to feel, even when it's terrifying? Please take a moment and share that one thing below in the comments. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And when you share it, you give someone else the permission to feel less alone in theirs. If you've stayed with me all the way to the end, drop a number 5 in the comments below, so I know you walked this journey with me, every step of the way. And if this video resonated with you, if it brought clarity, comfort, or even a crack of hope into your day, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Because you never know who might be silently suffering and who might need to hear exactly this right now. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. You are not broken. You are becoming.